Folks, the Pittsburgh Pirates offseason is here. It really started yesterday with some moves that we saw, and the Pirates are going to be busy in the coming months. I'm joined to my right by Cameron Lyle, a listener of the show, to get some of his thoughts on the offseason today on Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That intro song. You know why? Because that means we have an episode going for us today, folks. Welcome back to Locked On Pirates. My name is Ethan Smith, your host of this wonderful show here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And there's some news, by the way, going on in the realm of Locked On that you guys will learn about pretty soon. That's going to be really good for you guys as well as it pertains to this show, other shows in the Pittsburgh Podcast Network, and the network as a whole. But as I mentioned in the intro, I'm joined by Cameron Lyle today. Cameron was the first person to hit me up about being on this show. Guys, if you want to be on this show, Cameron is living proof that you could be on this show. I love to bring people on. I always enjoy having guests on the show. And Cameron, how are you doing on this wonderful Friday, the first Friday of November?
Well, I'm doing great. And thank you again for letting me be on the show. I've done podcasts in the past, so I love talking, really. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that everybody tells me in my friend groups is that I talk a lot, and then I show them this. I'm like, well, I talk 30 minutes a day about the same baseball team, probably roughly 300 times a year. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. I'm like, yeah, it's very fun. But as mentioned, October flew by. I don't know if you felt the same way, but the month of October just kind of came and went. Spooky season was here, and then it just snapped away, and now it's time for Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You. Don't trademark me on that, please. I don't need copyright strikes for just mentioning it. But the offseason is here, and it did not take the Pirates long, Cameron, to start making some transactions, shuffling this roster around, and we saw some of that very, very early. And I guess with the Steeler game, a lot of people may not have even seen it just because it kind of all happened at the same time. But the Pirates, of course, tweeted that they traded Cody Bolton to Seattle for cash considerations. Vinny Capra has been claimed off waivers by Milwaukee. Alfonso Rivas claimed off waivers by Cleveland. Marcano claimed off waivers by San Diego, which put him at 35 players. And then, as you mentioned to me, which I just also found out, they made more moves last night. So what were those other moves, Cameron?
So they got rid of Angel, which they just put them on waivers. So I guess they're not technically picked up by anybody yet. But Angel Perdomo is gone. Miguel Andujar is gone. And Yuri De Los Santos is also gone. Yeah, so we'll see what that means if they get picked up, or if that means that they're just going to be shuffling in between AAA, AA, back to the MLB level.
Well, and what I think is very interesting about it too, Cameron, is before those moves that you just mentioned to me, they only had 37 players on the 40-man roster. You factor in Perdomo and Andujar and these other moves that they're going to make. I think it's pretty heir apparent that the Pirates going into this offseason know that they're going to be doing a lot of adding this year. I don't think they're going to be doing a lot of subtracting. And you might hear these moves and say, yeah, these are subtracting moves. They are. I mean, you're subtracting a player from your roster. But when you look at those first four, Cody Bolton, for instance, was a guy that a lot of people have been high on for quite some time, came up to the MLB level this year, didn't exactly light the world on fire. Wasn't terrible. I'll say that. He was not a terrible player by any stretch of the imagination. But did he really have a fit here? I think that's the biggest question you ask about Cody Bolton. Vinny Capra. On this show, I mentioned it probably a million times that Vinny Capra was not going to be one of those guys that was going to be in that middle infield shuffle that they're still figuring out. And even with like moving on from Capra and Marcano, you're still talking about G1 Bay, Liover Peguero, Nick Gonzalez, O'Neill Cruz, Jared Triolo. There's still a lot of questions to be answered about that. And specifically the one that like jumped off the page for me was Tucupita Marcano, because obviously he goes back to the place where the Pirates got him from in that trade with that was the Adam Frazier trade, not the Joe Musgrove trade. People sometimes like to get them mixed up because we, for some reason, love to make trades with the Padres and just give our players back and forth. But I really thought that Marcano was going to at least get one more chance. He obviously had that season-ending injury that's going to sideline him for quite a while. What were your thoughts about that? Because I really think with the Marcano thing, I did think with the left-handed bat that he had that he was going to continue to get the chances because Cherington traded for him. But alas, we're here now and he's no longer on the roster.
I think I understand the move. I understand moving on from him because the middle infield is very crowded. But what I don't understand is he was most likely going to miss all of next year with that ACL injury. And usually when that happens, I'm not sure with the offseason if it's different, but usually when that happens, you just remove them from the 40-man by putting them on the 60-day IL.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that makes more sense to do that because, I mean, what happens if Peguero doesn't turn out? What happens if Nick Gonzalez doesn't turn out? It's just kind of removing one of your options that you did have at first. I don't think it was a bad move because I mean, I don't really see a place for him right now, but also at the same time, he wasn't even going to be playing next year. So it is a little confusing, but I mean, I guess better for him to go into a better situation possibly instead of being crowded in a Pirates farm system or a Pirates team where he doesn't really have anywhere to play.
Well, and I also love that you mentioned the farm system because a lot of people also tend to forget that Termar Johnson is there too, and he's going to be knocking on that door pretty soon. And you mentioned obviously Angel Perdomo and Miguel Andujar also going on waivers. This happened last night, so they are still not like off the roster or anything. But then that takes that number down to 35. So you're already talking about, having 5 roster spots open before free agency even starts, which – oh boy, that's going to get real interesting. And you also mentioned that middle infield thing too, and I love that question that you asked is, do Peguero, Gonzalez, and all these young guys pan out over at second base? And that's something we'll talk about in the second segment too, about some things that you like about the offseason and what the Pirates might do. These are all questions we're going to have throughout the offseason. And on my last show, it was a trick-or-treat show. It was on Halloween. I said, don't be tricked into thinking that everything the Pirates do this offseason is a treat, pretty much, is what I was saying. Don't be tricked into thinking that Vince Velasquez last year, everybody made fun of it because it was the video and the hype video and all that stuff. And then if he didn't get injured, he would have been a pretty good pitcher for this team. He was on that trajectory. So I think a lot of these moves, we're obviously going to have our rash reactions to them, but we ultimately don't know how they're going to fit in the grand scheme of things unless they're like clear needs that we have. Like if we go out and sign a starting pitcher, I think we can guess, Cameron, that he's going to be in the rotation just based off of what we saw last year. We go out and sign a reliever, he's going to be in the bullpen right away. You go sign a first baseman, he's probably going to play first base quite a bit like Carlos Santana did last year. So any last thoughts on these early transactional moves that the Pirates have made to kick off this offseason?
So another one that I kind of found a little strange was getting rid of Rivas. I mean, I understand, once again, this is probably a move because, hey, we want to go get a first baseman. Hey, we want to go do this. But, I mean, you can't guarantee that you're going to sign the person you want to sign right now. So, and also you traded for him literally, I think, 4 months ago at the trade deadline, roughly. And, I mean, I know he wasn't the main piece for it. And I think he's like 27, 28, 26, somewhere in that range. So he's not super young. But also I think that holding on to him would be smart, but also I understand that they're freeing up these spaces, one for future signings and also for the Rule 5 draft, which I think some people are forgetting about as well. There's a couple people that are eligible that teams might be interested in. So you might see some of them hop onto the 40-man roster just simply because of that. So I think that's something we can look forward to in a couple of days as well.
Yeah, and it's just going to be a fun offseason. I think we can all agree on that. But before we get into Cameron's thoughts about the offseason, what he thinks the Pirates will do, and maybe even some players that he thinks the Pirates could target, folks, it's time to go make some money. It's the holiday season. And over at FanDuel, they're giving you free money right now over at FanDuel Sportsbook at FanDuel.com/lockedon because you can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's on a $5 money line bet. You could go bet the Kansas City Chiefs to beat the Chicago Bears if they ever play again for $5, and you're getting $150 in bonus bets if your team wins. That's $150 if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action because, Cameron, the app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options that include spreads, player props, over-unders, same-game parlays, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season because FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL and an official sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. Alrighty, folks, we're here at segment 2 again with Cameron Lyle, one of our loyal listeners of the show. Again, if you guys want to come on the show, please let me know. My DMs are always open on Twitter. I'm always on Twitter all the time, or X, or whatever we want to call it nowadays, because we also saw that Elon in the news offered Zuckerberg $1 billion to name Facebook something that I can't say on the show. So there's a lot going on in the world, Cameron. There's a lot going on in the world in the Pittsburgh Pirates. Obviously, with the World Series ending, it was kind of like refreshing in a way. By the way, shout out to the Texas Rangers for winning the World Series. I haven't said that on the show yet. But for fans that weren't in the World Series, haven't been in the playoffs, haven't seen their team play in almost a month, we're tired of the dead period of news. Like, we want stuff to happen. And we're getting to that point. We're getting close. So early in the offseason, I think last year, it was pretty heir apparent what the Pirates were going to do. You had Santana. You had G-Man Choi. They were both picked up relatively quickly to start the offseason. Obviously, the Kutch move comes later on that made the offseason a success and everything like that. So do you think that the Pirates are going to more go with the approach of getting everything they want early this year, or do you think they're going to give it some time to see how the market sets itself and give themselves some time to really look at everybody at every position that they're going to be looking for?
I think it might be a little bit of a mixed bag. I think that for some of the players that probably will have less of a market, they might try and grab them quicker. And kind of the opposite with the people with more of a market, kind of see how long or see what people are going to offer them. And maybe, hey, let me give them a little more, or hey, maybe they're not worth that type of money. Because I know that some teams, I can't think of anybody specifically in the past, will sign somebody right off the bat for a ton of money. And it's just kind of like a questionable move, especially in football, for example. Like, there's tons of moves that happen like right at the beginning of free agency, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But I think they do a little bit of both. I think the players that that have less of a market will be the ones that some of them might slide a little bit as the Pirates want to see who might be interested in them, and maybe they can get a better deal on them. But I think for the most part, it'll be a mixed bag with that.
Yeah, and I would assume that you also agree, like probably 95% of Pirates fans, that the main moves are starting pitcher, first baseman, right fielder, maybe bullpen arm, depending on all of that stuff. So how do you think that the Pirates are going to attack all of this? Like, what is your general synopsis, Cameron, of how you feel the offseason is like ultimately going to go? Like, how do you think the Pirates are going to navigate this? How do you think they're going to go out, and how many players are they going to sign? How are they going to do it? Do you see trades in the mix as well? Kind of just want your whole synopsis on what you think the offseason is going to be like.
So, yeah, I think it'll be a mix between trades and signings. I think I'm hoping that there's these two trades that I have. I don't have what the Pirates would give up, but I have two options that I think that they should go after, and I don't think that they'd have to give up too much.
Okay.
And so I'll start with the trades first, and this one might be a little iffy, but I think that they should go after Gleyber Torres, the Yankees' second baseman. There was reports that he was possibly unhappy there and that he may not be signing back after this season. And also with how you mentioned earlier, Termarr Johnson is coming up probably next year, maybe at the end of next year, maybe in 2025. This gives you an option, a sure second baseman. Not that I don't believe in Peguero or Ji-Hwan Bae or anybody that we play, Triolo, anyone that plays second base. It's more so a sure bat, a pretty good, an okay defensive player. And he's pretty young too. So, I mean, if it's somebody that plays really well and you want to sign him back, he's only 26, 27, somewhere in that range. I think that's a great move to make. Now, what they'd have to give up, maybe it would be a Nick Gonzalez. Maybe it would be someone like that. I'm not sure if they would want any of the Pirates middle infielders because the Yankees are pretty backed up there as well. And that's why also they talked about possibly moving on from Gleyber Torres, which he batted 273 last year, which I think is very good compared to a lot of the Pirates hitters last year. And I think that he would be a good addition, especially if I know you said you're not a big fan of the 1-year deals anymore, but if he was able to contribute to them possibly making the playoffs next year, kind of like a Marlon Byrd type player from, I guess, 2012, 2013-ish, I think that he would be a great addition. And another one that I think would be a good trade would be Reed Detmers. He is a lefty for the Angels. He's very young. He's like 24, 25-ish, I think. And he still has 4 years of service time, which is something I think is important with the Pirates because the market for starting pitchers is kind of very hit or miss for them. They usually don't want to pay starting pitchers a lot of money. And he's also one of those players, the Angels are kind of like, I don't really know what they're going to do with Shohei, with Mike Trout. It's kind of a firestorm in there. And I think if they were willing to give him up, I think the Pirates could offer something that they could want, considering they have holes in pretty much every single spot except center field and DH if Shohei stays there, and pitching, I guess. But I think those are the two biggest trades I think that they could get done and I think would contribute the most to the team.
And Detmers especially I like just because we've seen Ben Cherington have an affliction for these left-handed pitchers. We really have. And even you look right now, you even have Jackson Wolf, who is a guy that is just sitting here that might end up being a surprise entry into that rotation at some point. But for Cherington to go out and get a guy like Detmers, who, as you mentioned, is relatively young, still has a lot of service time, he loves lefties, and he knows that they need a lefty in this rotation. Because realistically, if we're looking at the rotation right now, it's Keller, Oviedo, and a bunch of whatever they can put together, as we saw throughout the second half of the season. So I love the idea of Detmers. I think if the price is right, you do it. Now, I think that the price for Detmers would actually, and this is probably something that I'll get crap for, I think the price for Detmers would actually be higher than it would be for Torres, just because that service time that you mentioned, you're going to be keeping Detmers for 3 to 4 years on end, depending on how you want to contractually handle it. Whereas Torres, you would be keeping him for a year, which I'm not against the 1-year deals completely. It's just more at this point, I don't want to look at a guy like Gleyber Torres and say, okay, he's coming in on a 1-year deal, so if we're terrible, we're just going to trade him somewhere else. And is there the opportunity to sign him? That's usually what I always think about after that first year is, are the Pirates in a spot to re-sign this type of guy? And love those two options. I really do. And obviously, I think both of those moves, if they were to happen, would fill two needs pretty immediately. I mean, because then you're talking about Leover Peguero and Nick Gonzalez being backup second baseman or backup middle infield options. You look at Jared Triolo, he can move all around the diamond. I keep saying it every show. He's like a Josh Harrison type whose jersey is right here on my wall, as I always say. And I think that would save up a lot for the middle infield because then it allows you to just go look at first base and find something over there. And you don't really have to worry about much. And it sounds like your infield really sets itself up. And your rotation gets a valuable left-handed starter as well.
Yeah, and so that was one of the reasons why I looked at both of them. I figured Detmers would definitely be harder to get, but with the service time, I really liked the service time. I really liked his upside, even though I think he had like a 4.5 ERA-ish last year. Which
people also forget that he pitched a no-hitter, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know that. So there's that too. That would be something that the Pirates don't have anybody on the roster that's done that. But another pitcher that I think that they should go out and get that I haven't heard anybody talk about, which I think is kind of surprising, but also at the same time I kind of understand why, is Trevor Bauer. I know that Trevor Bauer is very hit or miss with people with his off the field issue or even on the field issues, but he pitched 130 innings in Japan, 2.76 ERA, and 10-4 with 130 strikeouts. And I think that, especially since no one is talking about him, I think the Pirates could sign him for relatively cheap and for a multi-year deal. I think he's 33. Mm-hmm. So is he out of his prime? Possibly. But people also sleep on the players in Japan. Like the league he was in was no joke. Like it's a pretty legit league right outside of Major League Baseball. but I don't know if it's even an option for them to bring him in. He might be blackballed from MLB possibly, but I think it's a deal worth looking at possibly, because then if you have Mitch Keller, you have Johan Oviedo, you have Trevor Bauer, and you get Detmers, there's 4 people, and people forget that JT Brubaker is supposed to be coming back next year. And even if he's okay, like, I mean, he doesn't have to be Mitch Keller good. JT Brubaker is a decent 4-5 rotational piece.
Yeah, and you mentioned Bauer, and obviously people are going to have thoughts about Trevor Bauer. I've had people in my comments section mentioning Trevor Bauer throughout the entire duration of 2023. And off-field aside, I think it would be a phenomenal move. Now, I'm going to probably sound contradictory here because a guy like Bauer, with the age that he has and the unknowingness of it, that would be the 1-year deal that I would probably do. But I also wouldn't be against 2 years, because then you at least have the security of saying, if he does turn out and looks really good, we don't have to worry about re-signing him after the season. The 1-year deal then puts you in that issue where if he comes out and throws for a 3.75 ERA and almost 200 strikeouts and goes back to what Trevor Bauer was, I'm sorry, folks, there's no way in hell that you're going to re-sign him at that point, because then the Dodgers, the Mets, the Padres, the Braves, everybody that has all the money will call him. But again, off-field aside, I think it's fine. And if we're really going to get into the off-field stuff, wouldn't it be best for him to go somewhere quiet like Pittsburgh? Wouldn't it be best for his agent to say, hey, maybe you should go to Minnesota or Pittsburgh or Washington, or like some place where you're not going to have all the eyes on you every single time that you're on the mound? And I could not agree more, and we'll continue this conversation in just a moment. So, Cameron, you've mentioned Trevor Bauer. You've mentioned Reed Detmers. You've mentioned Gleyber Torres. I'm liking this because this is more of me just asking you things and then I'm reacting to them. Are there any other players on the free agent market or trades that you really think could help this Pirates team going into next season?
So this one kind of depends on if they were to go out and get Trevor Bauers or Reed Detmers. If they didn't get both of them, I think that a player that will have a very, very, very low value coming into this free agency, but a very high upside, is Luis Severino, the Yankees starting pitcher. He had a 6.65 ERA this year, which was the highest that he's ever had. So I think his value is even lower now that he's coming off such a bad year. So it's kind of like, oh, well, we can sign him for $3 million, maybe a little lower, and then have him for the year, and maybe sign him for 2 years, maybe, and have a club option deal. And if he doesn't pan out, he doesn't pan out. And I was looking at him, and he kind of reminded me of Ivan Nova from, I don't know how many years ago, 6-7 years ago. Mm-hmm. He was roughly the same with closer to ERA, higher with Severino, where Severino and both him started with the Yankees and both were playing well. And then it just kind of blew up. And in their last couple of years with the Yankees, both of them had an ERA above 5. And then you look at what Nova did for the Pirates for 3 years, and he was a pretty good three pitcher or even a 2 pitcher in that rotation. And I think another position that outside of the bullpen, I mean, I think Jordan Hicks and Adam Ottavino would both be good options, but they're not going to be the big names that people are looking at. But at first base, I think the biggest option is probably Rhys Hoskins. And I know that you've mentioned him before. And I think that he also has a low value. Not that money is everything, but just with the Pirates' history of spending, they don't usually spend a lot of money. But I think they can get Hoskins for 2-3 years for $5-6 million, especially since there isn't a lot of first baseman prospects that they have currently, unless they were to move Triolo to first. But I like Triolo's defensive aspect, but I don't know if his batting, unless he can get some more power. I like a singles guy, but that's not really what you want at first base. You want kind of a power guy. And Santana, which it would be nice to bring him back. And then CJ Cron and Josh Bell were my other 2 options at first base.
CJ Cron is a guy that I always kind of stick to. Always love CJ Cron, even though I think his time in Colorado did kind of elevate him a little bit, no pun intended, just because of the elevation there. I think he did get a lot of his stats inflated. The thing with Hoskins is I know it's easy to say, oh, he'll be a cheap guy. But we've seen it in past off seasons where those guys that miss the entire season go into free agency and some team for some reason will give them 3 years, $60 million or 3 years, $50 million. That's why I think the Pirates are ultimately going to wait a little bit, and it might lose them a guy like Rhys Hoskins, which is okay. But I think they're going to wait a little bit to see how the market really falls. And I think that's where most of this offseason is going to be dictated, because obviously I think we can all admit we're not getting Ohtani. We're not getting Montgomery. I know Jordan Montgomery would be phenomenal on this team, but the Pirates just won't spend that money. Blake Snell is a no. There's a lot of different guys that you look at, and that's usually where the offseason ends up being dictated, is where the big guys go and what they do. But a lot of the moves, if you notice, folks, that are made in the offseason that aren't exactly the big splash moves are usually what end up being the best moves. I.e., look who just won the World Series. The starting pitcher that they signed, the Texas Rangers, barely played for them this year, and Jacob deGrom. Nathan Eovaldi was their second option as a starting pitcher in free agency last year, and he went undefeated in the postseason. That's more of why I stress these things about, I know Hoskins would be great, but I don't want the Pirates to make a rash decision that ends up making them overpay a little bit when the market is going to set itself naturally anyway based off of what other teams are doing.
Yeah, and I think Hoskins is definitely one of the ones that'll be a let's see what other people are giving him, and maybe, hey, we can get CJ Cron for way cheaper and get as much production, or we can get Josh Bell for way cheaper for the same production. And I think Trevor Bauer is a person where you kind of want to jump on it. Yeah. If you want to get him, you give him the money now, because then you're like, then he sees that and you're like, oh, they're interested in me. Maybe I'll just sign here because this is the first team that's been interested in me or wanted me on a team for the past 2 years. So you look at that and you're like, oh, okay, this is this team wants me, so I want to play for them, or this fan base wants me, I want to play for them. And I think the same could be said for Santana. I think that I think they should wait on Santana and not give him a contract to begin with, even if they end up signing him. I think that they need to look at the field of first baseman, or hey, maybe look at the trade options. I'm not sure who would possibly be a trade option at first base, but I think Santana, if he's given an offer to come back to Pittsburgh, he'll come back immediately. So I don't think that's an issue. And especially if they don't get Gleyber Torres, I think outfield I'm not as torn with them bringing in somebody. I think that they have plenty of options there. And especially if they bring back McCutchen, I hope that he plays right field a little bit next year, even though he didn't play it all this year. So I doubt that they'll have him play right field at all next year. But I hate to say it, but Henry Davis is not the option in right field. I think he is more suited to be a DH or a catcher, or even a first baseman if they work with him this offseason on that. So I think regardless of who they sign at first base, I think they need to get a second baseman, at least somebody that is not a superstar, but like Gleyber Torres would be a higher end second baseman. But these other options that I have, like Gene Segura, he had a pretty bad year last year, but I mean, he's been very consistent in the past. So, I mean, hey, take a chance on him. Or Elvis Andrus, who's a veteran, older, or even Josh Harrison. I wouldn't mind them bringing back him, especially adding in another utility guy, especially if Ji-Hwan Bae gets hurt, because I know he missed a good chunk of games last year. And that's kind of what led to Triolo being on the team for a longer period of time and him playing different spots. But I think second base is a bigger deal than maybe right field would be for the Pirates, just because I'd rather have a sure second baseman. And I'm not saying, once again, I'm not saying Peguero can't be that sure second baseman, or Bae or any of those guys, but I would just rather have a solidified second baseman next year to either sit maybe in the second spot in the lineup or maybe towards the end of the lineup, instead of having a revolving door of, oh, Nick Gonzalez today, Alika Williams tomorrow, Peguero for the next 3 days, someone else for the next 4 weeks or something. I would rather have a solidified player.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. But Cameron, thank you so much for coming onto the show and sharing all of your thoughts. It's probably nice for everybody listening to hear somebody else talk about the offseason other than me. Where can people find you, man? Where can they find you on Twitter? Where can they find anything that you do and talk about the Pittsburgh Pirates?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Cameron Lyle 1913. I don't do too much tweeting, but sometimes I'll tweet about the Pirates or any other sports that happen. But yeah, thank you again for having me on the show.
Yeah, of course, man. And guys, this is Locked On Pirates. You can follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates. Make sure you follow this show on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Odyssey, or wherever you get your podcast. My name is Ethan Smith. That's Cameron Lyle, and I'll see you on the flip side.